She joined the European Commission in 1983 in the DG Research, and being more than 40 years involved in European research and industry, she left a great mark. And since late 2019, she was a policy coordinator in the cabinet of the President Ursula von der Leyen in charge of foresight. In mid-2024, recently, she retired and joined the ULB as a visiting research. So, ladies and gentlemen, huge round of applause for Nicole Dewandre.
So better to speak here. Do you hear me? Or do you prefer if I speak in the... Yeah, that's better. Thank you very much. Thank you to be there. I know I am standing between you and the drink. I've been here since this morning, and I must say that I really appreciated what I heard. And I realized that a lot of things that I'm going to share with you I think will resonate with what I think was motivating some question and intervention earlier in the day. And also, this is indeed, I have spent a career in the European Commission, but during all that time, I had a sort of specialty to look at the mainstream from outside of it somehow. So to propose this sort of reflexive stance, as I called it, that I've practiced within the House for 40 years, and I'm now practicing for external audience, but you are part of playing with the EU and EU funding and projects, so voila. But bear with me, that's sort of, I am young in terms of being out of the Commission, so I hope I get the balance right between friendly, critique, challenge, and yes, that I stay on the path. So, when I read, yes, the Draghi report, and I think Manuel is right that you should absolutely, if you did not do it yet, look at it, because it's an amazingly rich and report in terms of data and measurement and numbers and putting challenge together. But it is true that when I saw this sentence, first and most importantly, Europe must profoundly refocus its collective efforts on closing the innovation gap with the US and China, especially in advanced technologies. If you change China for Japan, and instead of advanced technology, you say information technology, you are back 50 years in time. So I sort of was pushed back in my past, and I felt, but what happened during all these years? Is really the Earth like a racetrack? Is it the only way we can see it? Or is it a black hole that we may fall into if we don't arrive first on the line? So these representations really are very, very deeply embedded in our common imaginary. And I must say that I do not think that they are the best one that can help us make the best out of ourselves necessarily. That's one viewpoint that, of course, anybody can disagree with. And instead of being a racetrack, the Earth is round, as we know, with the planetary boundary issue, with all the interdependence, with the fact that people less developed, do we mean they live in a black hole? I think it sends a very strange image of us to feel that if we are not on top of everything, we are nothing. I think we should avoid this way to speak of ourselves and measure the challenge that are ours. Throughout my career, I have been very much inspired by Hannah Arendt and what she wrote. Reading her work, I always felt she had this ironic standpoint, the way to put a finger with words on what I felt was problematic. So one of these sentences that I really appreciate is this one. Power is actualized where words are not empty. So she sort of put her finger on what we call buzzwords, because we are well aware that there are buzzwords and mantra. She wrote this in 1958. And I really wonder if this focus on innovation gap, the lack of innovation, the need to, so this that we repeat since almost 50 years, what grip does it have on reality? I think we need to ask ourselves. Because the reality, what is it? The reality is, for example, the fact that global GDP, more than from what it can gain from it, of course, I don't mean we don't need to complete the single market, but completing the single market in the name of GDP growth, this is something else, because you will never compensate with achieving the single market what you lose because of your demographics, for example. I think the dependence of GDP growth rate on the demographic trends is very high. And that trumps other factors that can encourage or boost GDP growth. So let's stay anchored and face the fact that indeed the demographic trends holds back the GDP growth potential that we have ahead of us, compared to other areas on the Earth where the demography is different. The second reality check, and that was addressed this morning, is the price of energy. And indeed, Draghi himself writes, the first priority is to lower energy prices. That is, I think, very, very important. But paradoxically, that comes in the second area of action. So the energy price is addressed in his decarbonization and competitiveness joint plan, when he puts the innovation gap very first. So I just want to say that I think that indeed lower energy price would boost productivity and growth, maybe more than focusing on innovation first and thinking that innovation is the only reservoir for GDP growth. The puzzle also with GDP growth is that we totally seem to forget about the whole beyond GDP debate. I'm not speaking of degrowth, but the fact that GDP in itself is not a proper benchmark for a society in general should be kept in mind. And I think that because the US indeed in the digital transition is clearly ahead, does that mean that altogether they should be a model and they should be our benchmark? So in terms of Human Development Index, then you cannot see, but I took the picture to see, okay, the United States ranks 20th. And you have in the first 20 a lot of EU countries before the US. So just keep in mind, that doesn't take away the strengths of the US, of course, but it just balances a little bit what we can think of ourselves as Europeans. With Sustainable Development Goal, well, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network just issued a report on where are we with the Sustainable Development Goals. And there you see that when it's dark blue, you are better ahead. So there also, Europe is better, globally speaking, of course, you have to look into each one, than the US. And this report of SDN also shows that in terms of how each member state of the UN, so there the EU doesn't appear, but each country, who is contributing to the UN system, and they have 6 indicators that are put on this slide. I don't know if you can read them. Ratification of UN treaties, percentage of votes aligned with the international majority of UN General Assembly, participation in selected UN organizations, participation in conflicts and militarization, the use of unilateral coercive measures, and contribute to the UN budget and international solidarity. And this report there also shows the US, I did not expect that, I must say, but ranks the last country, 193rd of the whole member states of the UN. And finally, the huge inequalities, the mortality I don't speak about of course, the guns problem and all that. So all these issues should not make us forget that the US has problems that we don't have. So let's also nurture the strengths of the European society and not only see ourselves in terms of the lagging behind or the gap that we have compared to the US. The second puzzle is long-term. I think in this comparison with the US, because in this 50 years debate, the only thing that changed was the third term. You know, it was US, EU, and then it was Japan, then Brazil, then we had others, now it's China. So the US-EU rivalry was always there. And I think that it may also put us in a situation where we think that as long as we are not like the US, we will not be good enough. And I think that this is not useful. So the European Union is not and will never be the United States of Europe. And I think it's misleading to value the EU against that benchmark. We have a history which is totally different. The US has been, built as a political entity with mainly European migrants two centuries ago. And we cannot change that now. These starting points where we come from determine still today the path ahead. It's not fully deterministic, but it cannot make us being reasonable in thinking we should be like them. That's what I mean. On peace is the first and foremost objective of Europe. That's a Draghi report sentence. At home and abroad, and we must continue in this steadfast effort, but security threats are rising, and we must prepare. And I think on peace, when we say at home and abroad, we need to remember that the relationship with the European Union and peace was mainly to overcome a war that was Europe-made. It ended up in a world war, but it started at home between members of the now European Union. So in terms of peace in the world outside, we have no track record so far. And I think it's important to see how we can build one. And that maybe, I was wondering if one of the problems that both the US and the EU may be sharing is the domination legacy. When you have been dominating the world, which the EU has been doing, before World War II, essentially, or even before World War I, it's very hard to abandon that status of domination, and that was before the European Union was created. So I think that seeing equalizing loss of dominance, which is not necessarily a decline or not necessarily falling in a black hole, is very important, but very difficult, because I think that for people who identify themselves as dominant, this dominance stands for their identity feeling. So we have to be aware that we are sort of addicted to our past domination, and it's a real new feeling to learn to be at ease in an order that we do not dominate as much as we used to. Because if we just keep trying to keep this domination and feel secure only if we maintain this domination, I think that because of the objective and reality reason that the new environment, that may be very difficult. And indeed, maybe there is a black hole. For the dominant, when he's not anymore dominant, that may feel like falling in a black hole. But it is an imaginary issue. The third puzzle is democracy crisis. What is the problem of democracy? It's the difficulty that we have of, on the one hand, having sometimes a lack of coherence. The Draghi report explained that we need 800 billion euro. And he insists that this 800 billion euro is given the objective we already adopted. So this is not to do more things. It's just to achieve what we said we wanted to achieve, so to honor the decisions that have been taken. That's just one example of a lack of coherence to which we are pushed because of the policy process where, every Wednesday the college has to adopt a text, and when you adopt a text, you have a specific perspective, and then in another text you take another perspective. And you all know now that, for example, even in the digital regulatory acquis, there are tensions between privacy protection, between encouragement of sharing data, for example, and stuff like that. So the lack of coherence, or if you step out of the digital, for example, between competitiveness and sustainability, between competitiveness and efficiency and resilience, where resilience requires sometimes to have a sort of a loss in efficiency to increase the resilience. So you cannot have everything. You cannot have the cake and eat it. Sometimes you have to make choice. And from a lack of coherence, what ends up is a loss of meaning. The people that see us acting wonder, what is that? There is a loss of meaning in what we do. But then we tend to think that, the solution, we understand, we need to be coherent. And then we think that this coherence needs to be full, that there is only one way to do things. And then what we lost is diversity. And in fact, in between these two constraints, we have the democracy which is squeezed. What we lose is plurality. I will tell you about plurality, which is an Arendtian concept in one or two slides. So democracy works at its best when we all admit that reality is what can be seen by different perspectives that are equally valuable. If we agree to share how we see and analyze things with others, different point of view, but of equal value, then we can have this plurality. If we cannot have that because it's just a fight and a rapport de force between forces, then we lose this diversity that is at the heart of democracy. So I come proposing to you that I think that maybe there are three blurring factors to a clear-eyed approach. One is this affective ambiguity, I called it. We have strategic ambiguity, this affective ambiguity with the US, which is a reliable partner, but which we consider as a challenger. And where we think that if we lag behind, we risk of falling in a black hole, which is very strange when you speak of a reliable partner, we can admit. So, and the digital, together with defense and space, is at the epicenter of this ambiguity. So, I think that this is one of the blurring factors. The second blurring factor that I want to flag is a form of denial of EU's agency. Sometimes we speak of the world that becomes contested, of rivalries, of weaponization, as if we were there just observers and taking at face value these trends. I think it's very important that we take conscience of our own agency within that, and the fact that this is a situation where we are part of it and not just taking it from heaven or from outside. So it's not a cloud falling on us somehow. And then the hammer and nail syndrome. Sometimes I feel that when we identify a problem at EU level, we think there is always either a lack of coordination or a lack of size, meaning always we need more EU, either coordination or joint action to solve the problem. I think that, of course, it should not be an automatic diagnostic. That's what I mean. This is why I say hammer and nail syndrome, that sometimes there are problems that requires a finer analysis than this lack of, this fragmentation or this lack of coordination or size. And that is also how we can improve what we do as EU together, instead of thinking that by EUization of everything, we will come to address all the challenge. And that may be, now I come with Arendt, that somehow the EU suffer, but also other political games at national level, I think, of being locked in modernity. We still use in our document the word modern to mean up to date. We have their example, modern foreign policy, social fairness in the modern economy. It will modernize and simplify. Often with modernize, you take it out and it works well. If you say it will simplify your public procurement, it's good enough. What does modernize add to it? Frankly, nothing. And often it's the same with transparency. You say transparent, clear. You have clear, it's enough. You don't need to be transparent on top of it. So these are typically buzzwords. But it shows that if we all know that in physics we are beyond modernity, and in art we are beyond modern art, politicians and citizens still feel they are modern, politically wise. And it may well be that the digital world and the digital transition and the green transition is pushing us in an era which will be the era that succeeds to modernity and has no name yet. But okay, we are not in antiquity anymore, we are no more in Middle Age. So at one moment in time, you know, the name of the epoch or the period is changing. And I feel that modernity is not quite the good name anymore, but I don't have the new one. I thought hyperconnectivity might be a new name for the next era, but it's not for me to tell, of course. So what does it mean to be locked in modernity? Well, it is this wonder and fascination for Galileo and Newton and the fact of considering that we should address human affairs and politics with the same solidity and determinism that we can address the world of things and the world of natural science when you have Newtonian mechanics in mind. Don't try with quantum physics. So this means that agents are supposed to be rational, interest-led, free if they are without constraint, and if they can control their life and maybe others to help them reach their means. The relations in a modern framework are always either vertical, you identify what is the cause, and this is on top of the effect, which then follow the cause. Or if it is horizontal, it's agonistic, because there you need to neutralize each other to avoid excess of power. So that representation of relations where you either it's vertical or it's agonistic is very frustrating and cannot provide the conceptual basis for a rich cooperation. But again, Arendt comes with a concept that brings it. And in modernity, and this is something Arendt wrote in 1958, she wrote, all that the giant computers prove is that the modern age was wrong to believe with Hobbes that rationality, in the sense of reckoning with consequence, you see the algorithmic understanding of what rationality may be, is the highest and most human of man's capacity. And indeed, it is because we have this in mind and we have carried this over for 2 centuries that we now find normal to speak of computers or AI assistants as persons. They can say I, we are not shocked, because we have thought of people like this for centuries. So this is the trap we need now to try to step out, and it's just a mental operation, a thought experience. Sorry. Doesn't work. Hello. Yeah, next slide doesn't. I'm stuck. Yeah, because one of the corollary effect of this rationality being our means to secure ourselves about the fact that we are not fooled, creates a situation where we are in a position where we have this fear of being manipulated. So there is always this, both the fear, the haunting perpetual doubt, together with the fascination for who is supposed to be the puppeteer. And we never know if we are the puppet or the puppeteer. But see the vertical relation again. Now the conceptual shift that Arendt proposed, and that we did in there I put on the upper corner, the On Life Manifesto. This is an expert group led by Luciano Floridi that I convened when I was in DG CNECT, and that has ended up published in this book. And he said, Luciano, that we are building the raft of the new concept while swimming. And the point is that because material connectivity is all over the place as a reality, so in the real mountain, not in the reflect in the water, you see, in the real mountain you have this connectivity. That is why now is the moment to remember that human beings are not rational in first instance, but relational. Because if we foreground relationality over rationality, not meaning rationality is not there, but we foreground relationality, we can again make a society and distinguish machines from human. Because connecting together human and connecting together machine is not at all the same thing, as you all know better than I do. So that's a way to rediscriminate humans from machines. And she helps us, Arendt, to do that in this book, The Human Condition. And mainly, and this is where, of course, now was not the format to go dig deeper into that. There are papers about that if you're interested, or send me a mail and I can go deeper with that. But from Arendt, I want to share with you the two concepts which should be at the heart of politics and that she proposed. The first one is natality, meaning we as human beings come to the world by birth. And she says, all philosophers before me spend a lot of time thinking that we are mortal, that we are going to die, which is true. But she said, not only are we going to die, we also came by birth. And that's something that is worth thinking about, because it means, one, that we enter into a world that was there before us. We enter into something existing. We are not created out of scratch, and we come from within, and we are within the world, and we are a beginning in the world, meaning we keep this faculty of being beginners all our life. And of course, you can say, okay, now I'm 65, so I have less years to live than I had when I was younger. That's a mortality perspective, sort of the backward planning, you know? Not interesting, you can admit. But you can also think, this is the first day of what I still have to live, I don't know how long. And today is a beginning, and we can live the present, not as a backward planning from the future, but as a beginning from which you prompt a new stuff and new initiative. So I think that natality perspective is very, very interesting, because it transgresses the notion that we can only be secure when we can plan and control. I think we are all happy of being who we are because we have encountered a lot of unexpected things which were not dramatic. So it's important to keep in mind the fact that it is nice to encounter unexpected things when they are not dramatic. So freedom is rooted in our ability to begin. And plurality. So plurality is a combination of three characteristics. These three. One, we are equal. She says equality is not a goal for her, it's a fact. And it's true that in modern minds we forgot that we were equal, that besides all the difference in wealth, there are a lot of things we have in common. And so one of the things we have in common is to be unique, she says. So she combines uniqueness and equality in a way that in modern minds you cannot, because either you are equal but then you are the same, or you are unique and you are different, unequal. So this combination of uniqueness and equality is the basis from which you can think of horizontal relations. And this is, the loop goes with this who form of identity. She says we have an identity with a revelatory character, which has a diamond character, meaning this identity is like something in my neck that appears to you more surely than to myself. If I want to control who I am, you will only see my will to control. I will not manage to control. I will only let you see that I am control freak. So this who identity means we don't know who we are if we don't take the risk of interacting with others. We cannot do without this relationality, meaning the only way to avoid that risk of, for example, being humiliated, or in relationship there are a lot of risk. But if you do not want to take the risk, it's even worse because you don't know who you are in the end. So you have no choice but taking the risk. And so vulnerability is part of our shared condition. We are all vulnerable as human beings and as political agents. And she insists on the fact that action out of plurality, what plural agents do together, can never be undone. So that's something also we need to accept, because as modern people, sometimes we would like to have a control Z on reality and go backward. So accepting that this is not the case is also staying anchored in reality. So with that, we had modernity in the 20th century. And we have the democracy being squeezed because of our understanding of equality and identity. And I think that with these two transfer concepts, as I call them, we have a new equality and a new identity, the who form of identity, not the what identity, and the equality which is a given and that we need to honor instead of trying to reach. And that creates a ground for thinking and embracing interdependence. Okay, now I'm just 3 more slides away. What does it mean for the digital? Well, we spoke of regulation that is supposed to ensure that we have the European way of deploying technology, as if regulation could only by itself guarantee the ethical use of digital technologies, be they data or AI system or digital services. And I want to suggest that we need an ethos based on this Arendtian understanding of our relationality. By that I mean that beyond control, I heard a lot today that sometimes we think that if people are asked to say what we want to do with their data, they can give, they are supposed to determine the condition of use of their data, to be in control. I question the fact of, do we have the attentional capacity to manage all that? And is it because others, big tech in particular, make a lot of value with our data? The solution for us would be to make a little value with our data so is this mirroring strategy relevant? I think, I'm not sure, because the value they make with our data is because of the size of this data, and the value we can get from the use of our own data is ridiculous. We don't have the network effect, we have nothing. So frankly, I'm wondering if this is a good approach, because it put a lot of burden on the data subject to determine what we want to be done with our data. But as alternative, so to speak, I suggest to remember this basic rule that we had: avoid fooling. Again, because of our who form of identity, I think we all share the hate of being humiliated or being played around. So the avoid fooling, a lot of standard or regulation were done to hinder the capacity of fooling each other. Authentication, with one exception on April 1st, somehow. But I think that in the beginning of this hyper-connected era, we may have agreed that it's okay to fool people provided they consent to it and it creates jobs. Maybe I'm wrong. but I think that we should step away from this idea that as long as the people don't realize what we do, and if we think it doesn't hurt them, and if it's compliant with the regulation, it's okay. Voilà. Going back to a true avoid fooling as a basic principle for the decency of relations between us may be needed. Another thing is avoid doing to others what you would not like to be done to yourself, again, because we are equal. So, the AI system. Do the AI developers think the extent to which they would like to be at the other end of the system they develop? Or do they consider that because they are paid by someone who wants to deploy this system and who will take benefit of it, it's okay, and they don't think, they just think compliance, and they don't put themselves at the other end of the system? I think that if we had this ethos of avoid doing to others what we would not like to be done to ourselves, there are trends that would be different. And going there, but it's not the, I listened today and I realized how cloud edge is not the same as the AI system. It's an enabler of this AI system, but they are not these AI systems as they are in connection with humans in the company, for example. But I remember having attended a very interesting workshop at Oxford University where it was overall clear, and the book New Laws of Robotics of Frank Pasquale shows this as well, that AI systems, if developed in cooperation with the professional who will be impacted by them, then it's a win-win situation for the people impacted by AI, and I think for the AI developers and the company. If the AI systems are introduced to replace the people that's a total different story. And that was really, it appeared to be a general rule across professions, be it hospitals, schools, whatever. So there again, a general rule of think of AI system as accompaniment, not as replacer. So not in terms of productivity, but in terms of quality of service. And to end, this is the last slide. These are the questions I wanted to share with you that pop up in my mind listening to the debates today. The first one was, I heard a lot about the need to make things accessible to SMEs, and indeed this is very much at the core of our text in the European Union. But I was wondering, because when I see that we complain that we have no European big tech company, is the SME good per se, and do we think that we should have a vibrant SME system, or is it that we want to allow the SME that will become a unicorn to grow? So are SME of interest in themselves, or are they interesting to us because we hope for a unicorn? The second was open access versus what I would call open use. I'm struck, being a non-specialist, that open access systems are difficult to handle. And when you're not a software developer, you don't know, you're afraid of doing something wrong. Voilà, you don't play with it. Where closed systems are very convenient and friendly to use for people who are not software specialists. So how does open access react or respond to the convenience of use and user-friendliness that the closed system of the big tech is providing? And how can we, if the challenge is to try to have European-based unicorn, is it only with open access that we will arrive? And there was a very good panel this morning about this question, by the way. And that third and last question on data. When we speak of big data and the way the big tech makes value out of data by training AI model, by machine learning, by profiling, this is really crawling in huge amount of data. And I heard today that interoperability of data space was important, for example, with a very specific use in mind, so that data from this hospital can go to that hospital, also very, sort of pre-big data consideration. are we speaking of the same thing when we speak of interoperability of data exchange between data space for this very precise use on the one hand, and what access to huge data sets allow for AI systems, training machines, crawling and profiling. Oh, sorry, there was a last one. Yeah, so in the end, do we in the EU aim at challenging the big tech model, which is for the moment indeed US-based, or do we think that we can develop our own? And if we do so, will we respond to Draghi's worry? Thank you very much. I was a bit long.
That's perfect. It was, every slide brought us food for thought. Are there any quick questions? Okay.
So the digital sovereignty, the whole tech sovereignty concept. So how do you see that in context, but also in the evolution of the policy of the European Union? And what do you think that changes in terms of the expectations from the public sector to the private sector, and the other way around, from industry, the expectations by industry from the EU institutions, for instance?
Yeah, well, the word sovereignty in political science, is a very modern one. And indeed, the fact that at the heart of the sovereignty is seen to be, okay, I can do what I want, it's a denial of our relationality, the sovereignty. So with Arendt, she forces us to see that there is no way to step out of relationality. And I think we are aware of that. But then the question of sovereignty is, I would say, not of sovereignty, but of caring for our basic needs. There is nothing wrong in doing what it takes to not be weak to the point that we cannot develop as a society. So I think it's not so much an issue of sovereignty than an issue of care, where you do what it takes and what is within reach. And when you are dependent, well, you take it into account. I mean, I don't know how we can diminish our reliance on rare earths. We know what the situation is, and the Draghi report makes it very clear how dependent we are for the moment, notably from China, on some ingredients of the tech. And there is no way to step out of this really interdependence. So I would not take sovereignty in a radical way, because also if it's radical, it's aggressive towards others. But if you care for your own resilience and minimize risk, everybody else can understand. I think everybody else try to do the same. So, yeah, that's how I think we can think of it. And maybe when we were dominant, we thought that the world could serve us. There was no problem. We were not even aware of some of our needs. But that's our mistake. It's not others' mistake. Yes?
Yeah. It was a great presentation. Since you are in philosophy, maybe it's a strange question, but do you think that in this technology world now, the church has a role in any ways? Because the value system, we are talking about value systems, yes, and the AI is also going to be will have value systems in it. So if you look at now how we developed in the last 1,000 years, and what kind of roles were there, and how the value system is created in the society, and what is sustaining that value system. So how do you see this is evolving in the next 50 years maybe?
Okay, I have to confess that I don't like very much the discourse on values. I'm inspired by Arendt as well, because that tend to think that others have no values and we only have values where, and identifying ourselves by our values is not a who form of identity, it's a what. We claim that we have this value, but then the problem is those with the same value, are they the same as we are? So I don't think that you define yourself by the value, and when you do that, maybe without wanting to do that, you project the other as the one who has no value. So it ends up being Manichaean, and that is not the proper ground for cooperation and partnership in any way. So I think that we abuse this value stuff. We have a genuine approach, and that's very important, that we implement it, and we do what we think is right for us, but that doesn't need to be done in contrasting with what others do and is exactly what should not be done. You know, I think that's also the question that's important, to enter in plurality and to go toward this global order where we will be more among equals than we have been in the past. So, yeah, that would be my answer. Now, on the church, I ask for the joker because I don't know.
Nicole, if there are no more questions, again, thank you for such a different perspective. It was marvelous. Thank you.